Hello, good afternoon, good morning, good day, wherever you're joining us from. Welcome to today's training session. Welcome back for those of us who joined us for part one earlier in the week. So we're just letting you in a moment ahead of the start so that we see there's lots of attendees ready to go. So giving you a moment just to get your settings sorted. Feel free to say hello in the chat again if you'd like to. And we'll give it just another minute until we're at the top of the hour and then we'll be getting started. Thanks, everyone. Welcome, good day, good morning, good afternoon to those who've just joined us in the last few moments. Great to have you with us in the session. So I see we already have well over 200 participants and many more on the way, but lots to cover today. So I think in the interest of time, we'll get started. So a big welcome back and hello to those of you joining us today. It's great to see you again after our first part of the training on Wednesday. So as you know, we're here today for our second part of the two-part workshop on gender equality in capital markets. So as we're starting, feel free to introduce yourselves as you're already doing so in the chat. But we've got lots to cover today, so we'll get into it and get started. So firstly, just to say again from my side at the UN SSE team, a big thank you to our partners for this training program that we developed with IFC, UN Women, Columbia University, and the Luxembourg government as well. So for anyone who missed us at part one, you can find the recording for that session will be available on our event webpage to catch up with as well. But hopefully you did join us for part one because we'll be recapping on a lot of the connected concepts in the session today. As a reminder, from our event webpage that Landon's just shared the link to there, you'll also be able to access the slide handout presentation from both today's and Wednesday's sessions as well. And those slides will contain links to lots of the resources that we're sharing with you in the chat as well. So make sure to check out the slide presentations on the resources section of the event page if you'd like to follow along in the materials. So you'll probably be familiar with these points, but just as a quick recap, you are muted as attendees, but we really do still encourage your participation in the session. So great to see so many of you saying hello and sharing in the chat with us as we go. And then if you have particular questions for the team, make sure to use the Q&A box to put your questions in. And that will just allow us to keep track of those questions. Obviously, the chat can move quite quickly and it'll be easy for us to miss questions there. So make sure to use Q&A if you've got any particular questions, however big or small for the team. We're always happy to hear from you. And in terms of the format for today's session, again, it will be similar to the approach we took on Wednesday. So we'll have 2 hours of live time together. We'll take a short break in the middle of the session. And we really encourage you as well to make use of that opportunity to ask your questions as we go along through the session. So make sure to get your questions in through the Q&A box. And we really encourage and ask for your participation in the session as well. So again, we're going to be making use of Menti and polls throughout today's session. And finally, you'll be pleased to hear that after we've completed our part two session today, that's when you'll be able to get your completion certificate for taking part in the training. So to get your certificate, you'll need to fill out the feedback survey, which we'll share with you at the end of the training session. So we'll explain more at the end about how you can get your certificate. And so just to reintroduce your speakers for today's session, it's myself and Landon again joining you from the UN SSE team. And again, we're very pleased to welcome back our colleague from UN Women, Miwa Park, who's joining us again to cover UN Women's content here. So hi, thanks Miwa. And then later on in the session, we'll have two guest speakers joining us today. So firstly, we'll have Guillaume Jacques from the Luxembourg Stock Exchange, who's going to be talking to us about the work that Lux SE have done on gender bonds. And secondly, we'll be joined as well by David Pritchett from the EDGE Certified Foundation. So we touched a little on EDGE in our session on Wednesday, and we'll be going to talk a little bit more with David later in the session about their certification that companies can pursue as well if they'd like to use that as a structure to help them advance their gender and diversity activities. Okay, so just as a reminder as well, you'll remember this four-wheel structure that we're working through in our training session. So in our first training together on Wednesday, we covered off the prepare and align modules. And today we're going to be focusing in on those two second steps, which are implement and communicate. And so this is really building off what we learned in last lesson. So hopefully you were able to join us for that session as well. So an important thing to note about this wheel diagram, of course, is that we show it here in sequence, but we know that really these activities are an ongoing process. So once you've started communicating on gender, for example, this doesn't mean, of course, that you're done. And so you're going to continue to need to revisit these activities as you continually aim to improve your processes within your organizations. So in our two modules today, in Implement, we're going to be talking particularly around some gender lens market promotion and products available. So this may both be from the perspective of those who are investors here or in financial institutions who could offer these products, and also for those in companies, potential routes to access new capital sources through these routes as well. And then secondly, in Communicate, we're going to be going into a lot around stakeholder communication. So thinking about both the reporting that you can prepare to disclose your performance to stakeholders, and also how you can engage with different stakeholder groups, including suppliers. And so to cover off that agenda today, we've got two main objectives from our training that are good to keep in mind as we work through the content. So firstly, we'd like to help you to understand how you can capture market value for gender equality performance. And that could be through gender smart investment strategies or through the creation of gender focused financial products. And secondly, we'd like to help you today to communicate gender related information with stakeholders, both for your internal stakeholders and external stakeholders, and to help you identify the different guidelines that you can use to inform this communication approach. And then just to recap, finally, you'll see that as an agenda again for the training. So similarly to Wednesday's session, we'll take a short break in between those two modules as well to refresh ourselves. And then we'll finish the session by wrapping up with some takeaways and additional resources that can support you on your continued learning and efforts to advance this topic. Okay, so that's just a quick overview of what we're going to be doing. We'll go back now into Menti to get things kicked off again in a similar way as we did last session. So Landon will shortly, as he's just done, share the link, thank you Landon, to the Menti. And let me share my screen now as well so that I can show you some other ways that you can join us. Okay, so our first question in Menti is similarly to last session. We just like to get a sense as we start on what your current understanding is of those different objectives we're aiming to cover today. So what do you know about identifying the value that gender equality can add to investment strategies, around communicating gender-related information to investors, and explaining to your colleagues the financial value of gender equality? And as a quick reminder, the easiest way to get into Menti is to use that link that Landon has shared in the chat. But two other options would be to scan that QR code that I've got on the screen for you there, and also to go to menti.com and enter that 8-digit code that you can see right at the top of the screen in the darker coloured box as well. But thanks for those who've already found their way in, and I'm seeing lots of responses already. So it looks like we're quite middling, I think, in our overall comfort on these topics. So almost exactly in the middle of the scale. So maybe some of you kind of on the fence about what you know about this, but also maybe a little bit of a mix of average performance. So some of you, it looks like know a bit more, and some of you a bit less about these topics at the moment. So no problems at all, and just good to understand at the start. We should say as well, for anyone who does have expertise on these sessions, it's always super helpful to hear your perspective as well. So do feel free to share in the chat what you or your organizations are doing on these topics already if you have advanced some of these practices. Okay, and then a second question to get us started is just to test whether you can remember one of the key things we talked about last time. So we've got a quick quiz question and then we'll recap on that afterwards as well. So I see lots of you in there and ready, so I'll launch the question now. And you'll have a few seconds, just have a think and let us know your answer to this question. So the question is the overall objective here equity or equality? So you remember they're obviously quite similar words, but we covered both of those in our last session. So see if you can remember what we talked about there, and let us know which of those you think is the overall objective here, and then we'll get into talking about that. Okay, I see lots of you have already given us your answer. Just a few more seconds and then we'll see what the right response was. Okay, so it looks like it was reasonably even, but indeed the 55 of you who answered equality were right. That is the overall objective that we're looking at here. Equity, an important part of the equation, but equality, the overall aim. So well done to those of you who got that right. And let's have a little look now back in the slide presentation just to recap on why that is and what that kind of equation was that we talked about. But again, so here's a quick reminder of that diagram that you might remember. So here we have equality in the middle as the central objective. But if you remember, we have those three different attributes, diversity, equity, and inclusion, which are all a really important part of the equation. So indeed, equity is definitely an important part, but it's just one element. So as a quick reminder of this equation, so diversity, by this we mean ensuring that multiple identities are represented. So this can refer to gender, but also to sex, culture, race, ethnicity, religion, age, disability, and so on. So when we talk about diversity, we're talking about having that seat at the boardroom table. And then when we move on to equity, so equity is about recognizing and reorganizing power distribution. So equity is about being able to speak. So in our analogy that we used, we're thinking about that as having a microphone available to make sure that those who might be quiet currently are able to have their voices heard. And last but not least, we have to also have inclusion as part of the equation. So that's around ensuring that every individual feels welcomed so that they have equal opportunities to connect, belong, and grow, and to contribute to the organizations and feel comfortable and confident, authentically being themselves. So, in that analogy, we can say that inclusion is a little bit like having the interpretation or headsets that will then allow everyone at that table to understand each other and feel welcome. So, just as a quick reminder, this is really important when we're thinking about this topic that we remember that all of these attributes together are an important part of ensuring that we have meaningful and lasting change and are really seeing the benefits from the overall equality agenda as well. And so just recapping on a few things again that we covered in our last session. So firstly, we started around the groundwork and some of the key terminology. And we also talked about the business case and the human rights case for gender equality. And we looked at how the world is doing so far in terms of gender equality in corporate leadership. And we talked about some of those statistics from different markets that show that there's still quite a long way to go to reach gender equality. And so, as a reminder, we learnt that improving gender equality can offer many benefits to society and the economy beyond just the boardroom or the corporate environment. So, for example, we saw that studies have shown that gender equality can decrease violence in society, it can help to increase economic productivity, and it can also increase resilience against financial environmental crises as well. And so, what's also important to remember here is that we didn't say that women themselves are necessarily driving all of these benefits, but that actually it's just the equality of having different perspectives and a diverse approach that helps to give these benefits. And so we're also wanting to remember as well that increasing equality in corporate leadership has been found to have important benefits for organizations themselves directly too. So increased profitability, increased transparency, and improved management of wider environmental and social impacts. Okay, and just a few more things to recap from our first session, which are kind of foundational things that we want to make sure we continue to talk about today. So we also learned from Miwa about the UN Women's Empowerment Principles, or the WEPs, and we shared with you how you can use these principles to get started on gender equality. And as a reminder, we have Principle 5 there, which is all around enterprise development, supply chain, and marketing practices. And this is a principle we're going to be discussing a little bit more today when Miwa takes us through some of the UN Women's tools and work that you can use on responsible procurement practices that can be more gender responsive as well. And then a final reminder, since we didn't have much time to talk about this in our first session, is around the importance of corporate culture. So if you remember, we had that activity we ran through last time where we had Owl Inc. and Peacock PLC, and we compared the role that corporate culture played in those two organizations about how successful their outcomes were. So this slide just recaps here on a few of the key considerations that need to be assessed and addressed as part of corporate culture to make sure that we have lasting change when it comes to gender equality. So a few of the key actions that we'd like to flag here would be around the importance of providing gender sensitivity training for HR staff and managers to ensure that you have a fairer recruitment process, and that can then enhance diversity. And then also it's important to look at your policies. So thinking about aiming to provide equal opportunities for advancement in your organization. And that's something that can then enhance equity. Then when we move into audits and research, this is all around helping to identify the barriers that might exist within your organization and thinking about those things that might be getting in the way of inclusion, making sure that you have opportunities to remove those barriers and enhance the inclusivity for your workforce. And then finally, this also requires effective communication from the top of the organization to institutionalize that desired corporate culture. So it's important as well to also think about that tone from the top that your leadership is setting to really drive forward and speak the language and values of this practice as well. Okay, so hopefully that was a useful recap on some of the key things that we talked about last time. But now let's get started in covering off our new content in today's session. So we're going to start by talking around gender lens financing and the market mechanisms that can support those principles that I've just talked us through again there. And so to get us started with that, I'm going to be handing over to Landon, who'll get us started with our implement module.
Great. Thanks, Fiona. And good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. So when looking at implementation of gender equality, we'll talk a bit about products that support market action, and we'll also look at mechanisms that add value and promote gender equality in markets. And sorry, Fiona, I'm not able to change the slides right now, if you don't mind helping me out there. So we'll first look at how financial products are being used to support gender equality and what opportunities lie within those financing mechanisms for gender-allied companies. To get started, let's take a look at some of the trends we're seeing in sustainable finance more broadly. So this chart here, you can find that in a previous UNCTAD World Investment Report. It shows that in 2023, the total number of sustainability-themed bonds worldwide increased, although the rate of growth slowed a bit since 2021, but that total now stands at over 7,400 funds, which is still up about 7% from 2022, and these funds are worth around 3 trillion USD. I'll note you see a slight decrease in 2023, but that was due to depressed asset values and investor withdrawals amid persistent market uncertainties like high inflation, rising interest rates, and risk of a recession. But as such, sustainability-themed funds remain an important tool to direct capital towards sustainable development. We're also seeing significant growth in gender lens investing. However, the data on gender lens investing is a bit more difficult to capture and measure, so we have less clear of an idea of the exact magnitude of funds that consider those factors. We don't have enough time today to dive totally into this topic, but we've provided you with some extra slides in your handout on this if you're keen to learn more. So please check those handout slides after the workshop today. So I mentioned gender lens investing. So naturally, you might be asking yourself, what exactly is that? So let's take a moment to discuss this. And if you could please share in the chat, what do you think gender lens investing is? So if you have a working definition, please feel free to share in the chat or, take your best guess. Or perhaps even if you just have a few words that you think come to mind when you hear gender lens investing, please feel free to share that via the chat box now. I see Aliana joined us from 2X Global. That's a great initiative, by the way. Definitely recommend checking them out. And Aliana noted that it's an investment strategy that seeks to intentionally and measurably use capital to address gender disparities between women and men and better inform investment decisions. So that's a really great answer. The UN SSE, we refer to the 2X work a lot in our work on gender equality. Um, so yeah, that's a great answer. Looking at some other answers as well, I see someone noted that they'd never heard of it. That's completely normal, but it's great to, of course, as you're joining these sessions to learn a little bit more. Tracy noted it could be investing using GEI criteria. Samantha, she noted supporting female entrepreneurs slash startups, investing in companies or funds that invest their money in companies run by women or where women are the main users, beneficiaries. Okay, a lot of answers have come through, so of course, not enough time to review all of them. But we're going to look at an official definition. So we're going to use the Global Impact Investing Network definition, who define gender lens investing as investment strategies applied to an allocation or to the entirety of an investment portfolio, which seek to examine gender dynamics to better inform investment decisions and or intentionally and measurably address gender disparities. As the name Gender Lens Investing makes clear, gender is a lens, a way of seeing that helps an investor to highlight opportunity, illuminate risk, and understand strategy in a more nuanced way. So you might ask, how are investors using that gender lens to make their investment decisions? Well, there's many different strategies. So some of the core strategies we see here, they look specifically at what focus an investment strategy with a gender lens takes. But often we'll see a combination of multiple or all of these strategies implemented or utilized to varying degrees. The most common strategy you might be familiar with is a focus on leadership. I think someone noticed or mentioned that in the chat. But other areas that we see investment strategies focusing on are employees, supply chains, products and services, or perhaps the community. At the firm level, fund managers can drive the adoption of gender lens or gender smart investing by starting within their own investment house. Fund managers can strengthen the gender diversity of their own teams, for example, by the leadership setting clear targets or building a respectful workplace culture or making public commitments to gender diversity. I'll note, excuse me, I'll note the IFC has developed a framework that we link to in this slide that includes designing a gender smart investment strategy, engaging, training, and rewarding people within the firm, enhancing or adapting investment processes and systems, and identifying and collaborating with partners and external stakeholders at the firm level. So that covers the firm level, but let's shift gears and look at the portfolio level. So here, fund managers can adopt strategies in both origination and portfolio management. Those strategies enable fund managers to allocate capital to companies that are committed to these five key areas on your screen. Someone noted in the chat women representation and leadership as founders, co-founders, and senior management, or it could be a gender diverse and equitable workforce. Perhaps it's a gender inclusive value chain, or offering and designing products and services that consider the distinct needs of women and ensuring their operations do no harm to women in the community. The good news is that as the benefits of gender diversity have become more widely recognized, investor demand for gender smart investment opportunities has increased considerably. So this has led to the emergence of a variety of gender-focused financial products across different asset classes. So here in this slide, we give some examples in different asset groups to give a brief overview of this investment universe, and we'll take a quick look here at how these investments can be channeled towards gender equality and gender smart investments. On the left-hand side, you'll see a few investment vehicles or buckets. So first we have equity, as well as debt or fixed income financial products, often in the form of bonds, sovereign bonds, or corporate bonds, which are often used directed towards gender equality initiatives. And then that can also be debt or fixed income based, and those are the bonds I mentioned. Sorry, I got mixed up there. But on the right-hand side, you can see that investors accessing these financial products also vary. So they could be retail or they could be institutional investors, for example, making use of these financing vehicles on the left-hand side. It's important to note because different investors have different needs and expectations, which leads to a diversity of products as well to meet those different needs. And before we move into some case studies, I want to take a moment to quickly share about a recent publication from the UN SSE, the IFC, supported by UN Women. And this report provides a global inventory and analysis of nearly 300 gender-themed financial instruments. That includes bonds, as I mentioned, equity funds, and indices or knowledge products across both developing and emerging markets. I want to mention a few key insights here about the report. So we found that gender-themed financial products remain a niche, yet important and growing segment of the global financial market with index and market-based or market benchmark-based tools. So these are kind of like knowledge products. They're not these index and market benchmark tools aren't actually investable products, but they comprise a substantial share of those nearly 300 products I mentioned. And then we saw government issued gender bonds were particularly prominent in emerging markets. Well, we saw gender-themed equity funds. They held relatively low asset values. Some of them even only in, several $1 million, which is quite small in the capital markets. And what we also saw was we compared all the products and did a cross analysis with the UN WEPs, which of course we've discussed before today and 2 days ago. And we found inconsistent alignment with the WEPs, with the 7 WEPs. We also saw there was an absence of standardized definitions, reporting frameworks, and taxonomies in this space, which contributes to some valid concerns about potential for pink washing or gender washing, where gender labels may be used inappropriately where they're not demonstrating real impact and unfortunately almost more of a marketing tool or promotional tool. So the report urges greater integration of gender equality into sustainable finance taxonomies, stronger verification mechanisms, and greater alignment with the WEPs and Sustainable Development Goal 5, which is, of course, on advancing gender equality, to ensure gender-themed investments do deliver meaningful outcomes. With that, let's take a look at some case studies that can help us better understand a few examples of gender products. The first case study we have here is, well, sorry, first I'd note that it builds on what we discussed on Wednesday about how climate and gender benefits can coexist. So this example comes from Gold Standard, an organization focused on ensuring projects that reduce carbon emissions feature the highest levels of environmental integrity and also contribute to sustainable development. So this case study we'll look at is the Longo Safe Water Project in Uganda. This safe water project received the first ever gold standard gender responsive certification 5 years ago. And the project rehabilitates boreholes to provide clean water in rural Uganda. Uh, the last update we have here was in August 2023, where credits are available to purchase on the gold standard marketplace, which then offers purchasers the option to choose carbon credits from a project which has been rigorously assessed to reduce gender equality, or excuse me, inequality. I want to mention a few of the benefits that they've seen from their impact reports. First, 50,000 tons of CO2 emission reductions per year. So that's a very real climate impact. On health, we saw 40,000 individuals now enjoying clean water access, which in turn reduced incidences of waterborne illnesses. We also saw 4 hours gained per week per household and reduced school absenteeism. On that, it mainly saved time for women and young girls who in these communities were more responsible for collecting the water. But if we look even further into the gender equality impact, the project also reported that the local water resource committee is approaching parity with almost equal female to male representation. Reported incidences of domestic violence related to water collection have dropped to zero compared to about 35% prior to the project starting. And 100% of the surveyed water users spent their time saved on domestic work as well as income generating activities and social and leisure activities. So, all in all, some pretty fantastic benefits and impacts. It's also important to note that Gold Standard, when certifying projects for carbon credits, have two levels of gender analysis. So the one is mandatory and one is voluntary. From the mandatory side, all projects must achieve a gender sensitivity status. In addition, they have the option of becoming gender responsive, which requires a deeper analysis and setting gender-related goals and targets. In a few minutes, our colleague joining us from Luxembourg Stock Exchange will share a bit more about how gender is being included as a benefit of social bonds. But you can read about the next two case studies in the slides. As well, we have one more example on bonds, which you can review in your handout. And that example comes from IFC and their Banking on Women program. And I recommend checking out more of these case studies. But in the interest of time, we'll keep moving along and dive a bit deeper into exactly what it means to list or invest in gender bonds.
Great, thanks, Landon. So I'll pick up on that section. So we're now going to have a little bit of a deeper look at this type of bond and what it can mean. So what exactly are gender bonds? So to get us started, I want to introduce broadly where the focus of these bonds sits. And then Guillaume from the Luxembourg Stock Exchange is going to give us a more detailed overview on this in a moment. But I'll start by covering the basics. So as you can see here, gender-focused bonds are considered a subset of bonds within the green, social, and sustainability bond universe. So gender bonds are today often not seen as a category of bonds themselves, like we might see for green bonds, for example. But increasingly, we are seeing bonds that have a gender focus, either by setting distinct KPIs related to gender or linked to projects that can support or enhance gender equality as well. So what I want to highlight here is that we can also see a distinct overlapping of green bonds for climate and gender co-benefit, which we heard a bit about already in that case study that Landon just spoke to us about from Gold Standard as well. And so if we take a look at the debt markets, we can see that overall there has been a significant growth in sustainable finance through social bonds in a kind of a 5-year time frame. So the data that we have here is taken from the UNCTAD World Investment Report in 2024. And it shows that the cumulative global issuance of sustainable bonds sat at 1.5 trillion US dollars in 2023. However, as you can probably see here, we do also see some declines overall since 2020. But this research found that this was to be in line with the broader bond market, so not a specific trend for social bonds. But it's clear overall that social and mixed sustainability bonds are on a long-term growth trajectory with a fourfold increase in annual issuance from 2018 to 2023. And so many of you might be familiar with the term green bonds, but it's important to note that specifically since 2020, we have also seen that growth in social bonds and mixed sustainability bonds. And that's going to include these bonds with gender-related objectives that we want to focus on today. And so there's a number of different guidelines that we can use to help us determine what actually qualifies as a gender bond. And so importantly, these guidelines are useful whether you're the issuer of such a bond or you're an investor looking to invest in these bonds that contribute to real gender equality impacts. So you can see 2 examples of these guidelines on the screen. Firstly, we have the social bond principles, and this provide guidelines for those who are issuing social bonds. And the Climate Bonds Initiative's methodology on the right-hand side can be used to determine whether to include a bond in its social and sustainability bond database. And so what I want to highlight as most important about these guidelines is that the purpose of them is to help to build trust in the market and ensure that social bonds are designed to achieve their intended positive outcomes. So ultimately, it's not enough to just call something a gender-focused bond, but we need to really understand that the intended impact is being achieved and to be able to measure and track that. And so that gives us just a brief overview of this topic, but to go into it a little bit more in practice, I'm very pleased to be joined today by our guest speaker from the Luxembourg Stock Exchange, Guillaume Jacques. So Guillaume's going to be giving us a bit of presentation about the work that Lux SE are doing on this topic. So many thanks for joining us, Guillaume. You should, I think, have access to share your screen now. So I'll stop sharing mine and I'll hand over to you.
Hello, and thank you very much, Fiona. Thank you for having me today. I will try to share my screen directly.
Sure.
This should work. So yes, I'm working at the Luxembourg Stock Exchange, and more especially in the Green Exchange team as a sustainable finance analyst. And today I will speak about gender-focused bonds and what they are. And to start, we'll speak about the document which was developed by the ICMA, UN Women and the IFC, which is Bonds to Bridge the Gender Gap, a practitioner's guide to using sustainable debt for gender equality. And the goal of this document was really to assess what were gender bonds, how can they be used by all the stakeholders, so either the issuers, which is the most logical, but also borrowers, underwriters, arrangers, and external reviewers. And this was really a framework setting examples of what could be gender bonds and what they can be used for. So there are 2 types of gender bonds. So first of all, the use of proceeds, gender-focused bonds. And how do we identify them at the Green Exchange? So we were inspired by the guidelines mentioned just before. And so for a bond to be gender-focused, the proceeds must contribute to SDG 5, Sustainable Development Goal 5, which is gender equality. And how do we assess it and when? If all the categories financed are linked to SDG 5, and this is what is written in the pre-issuance documentation, so in the framework of the bond, then we can assess already in the pre-issuance that the bond is gender focused. But if the bond is finances lots of different projects and also projects which are not linked to gender, then we will have to wait post-issuance to see how the proceeds were allocated and to make sure that some proceeds were allocated towards gender equality. And as you mentioned also before, the gender bonds don't especially need to be social. They can also be green, social, sustainability, and SLB, as we will see just afterwards. But indeed, some green bonds can also have some benefits for gender equality. And now for SLBs. So first, what are SLBs overall? So the financial characteristics or structural characteristics of the bond may vary depending on the issuer and its objectives, and if they succeeded objectives or not. So the objectives are SPTs, so Sustainable Performance Targets, based on the KPI, a key performance indicator. And so how it works really, you can see on the bottom left. So first at the issue date, there was a KPI and an SPT. If the SPT is not met, for example, the coupon step up could be, so the coupon could increase, so there could be a coupon step up. If the SPT is met, there could be a coupon step down, but that's just one of the mechanisms. For example, the redemption price could increase or decrease based on the issuer meeting its objective or not. And for gender-focused SLBs, then there must be at least one KPI and SPT. Of course, the SPT is linked to the KPI, which is linked to SDG 5, linked to gender equality. Now for some case studies for you to more understand what I just explained about the two types of bonds. We will start by a short video of NMB Bank. So Aziz Shasha, who works at NMB Bank, which is a bank in Tanzania, and he speaks about his gender bond issuance. I don't know, Fiona, if you can help me with setting up the video.
Sure, absolutely. I think
Just
my colleague
one
Landon
moment.
will
Thank you
just
very
share that
much.
for you now.
It's a commercial bank, universal commercial bank, based in Tanzania, East Africa, that serves retail clients, corporate clients, and governments. I'm the treasurer for the bank, so main responsibility really is around mobilizing funds, so liquidity management, foreign exchange risk management, interest risk management, and coordination, just to make sure that there's balance sheet optimization and as well as capital allocation. So our gender bond really is a use of proceeds bond, that we issued in line with the international capital markets principles under the social bonds framework that allows us to raise money from the public and finance, women-owned businesses or enterprises that are dominantly owned by women, or businesses whose products and services actually eventually, service the female. Women proposition is a very important segment for our bank. And yes, we had a very fantastic proposition for women's savings, but we realized on the financing side, we needed to do something to mobilize additional funding to support growth for women-owned businesses. So we felt it was necessary for us, because a strategic fit for us is really to diversify portfolio. And given the risk profile of women, as far as loans is concerned, we realized that the non-performing loans ratios are actually lower than that of the male counterparts. Yes, so the projects we tend to finance, or that we're financing with these, are predominantly female-owned enterprises, and it cuts across different sectors, be it renewable energy, agriculture, health, education, and manufacturing as well. Obviously, it would be interesting that we measure the number of new loans that are issued to MSEs, so micro to medium and small enterprises women. But also it will be interesting for us, and we're doing that, to measure what impact that is having on their social and economic life. So how many jobs are created? Are they growing? Are they not? Are they expanding their businesses? I think those kind of metrics are very important, and it's part of our KPIs in ensuring that these funds actually put to the right use. Indeed, we've issued other types of bonds, retail bonds, corporate bonds. The difference with this gender bond is that the use of proceeds it requires a lot of transparency. Investors require that you go back to them to tell them, how these funds have been used. But in addition to that, it has to go in line with, the social bond principles and in line with the international capital markets, principle on social bonds. As opposed to the other bonds that you could simply raise and finance all manner of activities, without accountability to the investors. This requires significant accountability and transparency as far as investors are concerned. It was very well received by investors, domestic investors, and as well as international investors. As a matter of fact, it got 197% oversubscription. So we had significant appetite seeing from international financiers, but as well as domestic retail and corporate investors. I think one obvious one was the misconception, that you have a gender bond in the market, financing women, and therefore there was a perception that perhaps the bond subscribers were meant to be female. And so it requires a lot of effort, marketing efforts, to ensure that the male counterparts actually understood that it's not just for female, but they could also invest to help advance female. So that was a key challenge for us. But the other one is obviously data quality, especially in some of these emerging markets, still remains to be an issue. So you need to capture the right data at onboarding stage becomes very important, because you will really get to realize how critical that is when you're doing your impact measurement and reporting. But the other aspect is the opportunities are still huge. The financing gap for female generally is still quite huge, and that is why there's need for us to perhaps also consider scaling up, such issues going forward. Yes, just related to the previous question. So we realize we need to do more still, so certainly we need to raise more funding, be it domestically, be it partnering with DFIs or developing financial institutions, to just make sure that we can scale up, that portfolio. The need is there. I think we need to answer a very critical question of affordability, which keeps coming up, and hopefully using things like guarantee schemes from some of these development financial institutions will enable us actually affordably extend credit to female entrepreneurs. I think critical for me, again, back to what I've said, is data, at the onboarding stage. You need to get it right. But at the same time, just ensuring that indeed you have a pipeline sufficient enough to be covered whatever amount of bonds you want to raise, because ultimately investors demand, that level of transparency and accountability to see that these bonds are actually put to the intended use.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's a very interesting case study, very interesting use of a gender bond here by NME Bank, which is a commercial bank partly owned by the government in Tanzania, but it has operations in all districts of the country. So the bond finances, as he said in the video, MSMEs, so micro, small, and medium enterprises, which are owned by women. But also businesses whose products or services directly impact women. So these are two of the proceeds. Two of the ways the proceeds could be used in this case. And the bonds will actually help over 2,000 MSMEs in Tanzania. So it's very useful and impactful bond. And so we can see that the investors' response was really positive, as he also mentioned. So the bond was oversubscribed by 197%. And that's really interesting. And it was the first gender bond issued in sub-Saharan Africa. And I think it's also a region where it's really important to have similar financing methods. as women are facing lots of problem with financing in this region. They struggle to obtain access to finance. But yes, really, really interesting case. So that was an example of use of proceeds bonds, but also we have an example of a sustainability-linked bond, which was a bond from EQT, which is a global investment firm, which is located in Sweden but operates globally. And as I mentioned, I don't know if you remember, but the bond needs to be tied with KPIs and SPTs, which are linked to gender. And in this case, the KPIs were women investment advisory professionals and women independent board members appointed at certain AQT portfolio companies. And the SPTs were to increase the share of women in advisory professionals in the firm to 28%, compared to 21% in 2020. And for women independent board members, to increase the share to 36% by 2026, compared to 21% in 2020. So these are two clear goals that the EQT formulated, and they plan to coupon step up if some goals are not applied. I hope that this was clear, and I hope it helps to understand better how SLBs and use of proceeds bonds work. I don't know if there are some questions related to what I've just presented.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Guillaume. I think we've had lots of positive feedback in the chat on how useful this has been. So very much appreciated. We have got lots of questions, almost more than we can cover, but I'll just see if I can pull out a couple of the key ones, if that's okay. A couple of people have asked about, it's a practical point, but the acronym you mentioned, SPT, in your presentation. Would you be able to clarify what that stands for, please?
So SPT is a sustainable performance target. So the KPI is really the indicator. So for example, the number of women in a board, and the SPT in that case could be to reach 40% of the women in the board. So it's really the goal, the objective linked to the KPI.
Great. Okay, thanks for clarifying that. That's brilliant. And then I think a few people have shared their questions or kind of context as well on some of the aspects of gender bonds. I think some of these are quite specific to individual contexts, so maybe we don't have time to cover these, but I'm just checking if any of them jump out. I guess if you wouldn't mind, maybe a few people are maybe a little confused about the fundamentals of how bonds work and who should be investing in them, who should issue a bond, whether it's for companies or NGOs. I don't know if there's anything maybe you can summarize on that just to clarify some of people's questions there.
For a bond in general, so a bond is actually the debt of a company. So a company can have debt through a bank, which is not a bond, or through investors through debt. And yeah, actually, it's the bond will be structured as a way as the proceeds can be used through different projects, and in our case, they can be used through towards gender equality. But I don't know if it clarifies a bit what a bond is.
No,
So it's
perfect.
a debt instrument, but not from the banks. The investors are contributing it.
Absolutely. No, thank you. And I think in the case studies you share in the presentation as well, obviously people can see different examples of the types of organization issuing bonds as well. So we'll share with people again the link to access your presentation so they can review those. Brilliant. So I think if that's okay, we'll leave it there. There's a couple of questions in the chat. You may not be able to answer them all, but if you wouldn't mind having a look, perhaps just to see if there's any in the Q&A that you might be able to share any context on, that would be super helpful because they're a little bit specific, but don't worry if you don't have answers for all of those. But otherwise, I'd just like to say a big thank you for joining us today and for sharing that really, really valuable case study.
Thank you very much.
No problem. Okay, perfect. So I'll just go back now into our presentation. So as I said, a big thank you to Guillaume for that insight there. So that will wrap us up now on this unit almost. So I'm going to just finish off a few key points on that. So we've talked around how we can see gender equality themed products being promoted in the market more generally. And at the SSE, we also did an assessment of how exchanges are working with their markets to enhance gender equality as part of our guidance for exchanges on this topic. And we found that there are two main ways that markets are promoting gender equality. Firstly, through the promotion of participation, and secondly, the promotion of impact. So we'll take a moment now just to go through these two different areas. So starting with promotion of participation. So what do we mean by promoting participation in markets? Well, on both the supply side and the buy side, we're seeing the application of a gender lens in global markets to access unserved segments of the market. So on the sell side, we see markets promoting and supporting women-led businesses or female entrepreneurs. So for example, the Sourcing to Equal project is an IFC-led initiative delivered in partnership with the Women Entrepreneurs Finance Initiative and the Government of Norway. And that aims to connect 5,000 women entrepreneurs to make new markets via corporate procurement. And then on the buy side, so where investors sit, we can see that investors are investing in and supporting women traders themselves as well. And so this relates back to what we discussed earlier about the different gender lens investment strategies. And so this can not just be both about the portfolios of investment itself, but also what the investment firm is doing. And so this is because it's been well documented that all male investment teams are likely to invest in fewer women-led businesses. And so it's important as well to focus on advancing gender equality in the investment teams to help promote more access and opportunity for investment in women. And so one example of this type of promotion is an annual women-focused investment summit that's run by the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. And this is called JSE She Invests Summit. In addition to providing a networking opportunity for women, this event covers a variety of topics, including finance and investment literacy, and also showcasing the different ways in which women can invest in the market. So these are some of the different activities that we've observed that are happening to promote more participation of women in the financial markets. In addition to promoting that gender equal participation in markets, we've also seen in our research that exchanges and markets are also promoting financial products and companies based on their impact as well, or their ability to actually improve gender equality either within an organization or in society more broadly. And here we are seeing markets raising awareness of different financial products and promoting listing to products through awards or incentives that have the objective of shining a spotlight on those that are having a positive impact. So we also see markets creating segments or indices that aim to make it easier to find and invest in these high impact stocks or financial products. And so what I think it's also important to note is that different indices can vary from each other. So you can see here, and as we've already seen already, that in order to truly capture the holistic picture, which we know from our session earlier in the week is really important, what we need to do is look at this topic from many different perspectives. So for example, if these different indices were only collecting data about women on boards, this, of course, would let us know one important aspect of gender equality within a company, but it wouldn't necessarily give us the full picture. And so in some instances, this might be what we want to know if we're investing with a specific objective of either driving capital towards companies that enhance gender equality goals in society and their companies, or because we understand the value of enhanced gender equality as well. But actually, we also might want to know much broader data as well. And so we can see that between these indices, we're starting to see that they're looking at a much broader range of factors within an organization that could influence gender equality. So we'll see here aspects relating to the different policies in place, the level of transparency that a company is providing, how inclusive its culture is, for example. So some of those broader factors that will help to show that the overall approach to gender equality and diversity in the organization is being taken holistically. And so as we learnt last time when we talked about that case study of Owl Inc. versus Peacock PLC, sometimes we can think that we're solving a problem or improving gender equality by taking a certain action. But actually, we could be making it worse if we don't get to the root causes and we don't have the right data to help us know how well our actions are performing. And so the best way that we can prevent that risk is to ensure that we're thoroughly understanding what's happening in our organization by starting to collect and analyze the types of information we're seeing summarized here. Okay, so just to wrap up this section, now let's have a little bit of a Zoom poll. So we've talked here a little bit about the work that investors are doing on this topic. And now let's just launch the poll and get a sense of why you think investors are looking for gender-related opportunities. So what are the reasons that investors are focusing on this? And you can answer as many of these as you think are correct here, but maybe it's for financial performance, to access untapped markets, to enhance climate-related impacts, to prevent men from accessing leadership positions, to diversify their portfolios, or to manage gender-related risks. So have a little bit of a think and let us know how many of these you think are reasons why investors could be looking at gender as a factor in their investment approach. Okay, I see plenty of people taking part here. I'll give you all a few more seconds to have a think and let us know your answers, and then we'll look at those together. Okay. Just over half of 55% of people have taken part. I think that seems like a good number. So let's share the results here. So indeed, many of you are correct here. Everything except preventing men from accessing leadership positions would be a correct answer here. So of course, there's many different reasons and it's going to depend on the investor. But of course, there's lots of potential drivers here. But we would like to highlight, of course, that gender-based investing is not a zero-sum game. It's not about preventing men from moving forward so that women can instead. That's actually obviously not the intended outcome. And if that's what's happening, something's going wrong. So important to recognize there's lots of reasons why investors would do this, but that's not one of them. Okay, fantastic. So that brings us now to the end of our third module. So we're going to, as we did on Wednesday, take a quick break now at the midpoint of the session to refresh ourselves and to take an opportunity for a quick break or drink if you'd like to. So I'll start the timer now and we'll have a 5-minute break and then we'll be restarting on our module 4 after the timer finishes. So we'll see you then.
Back, everyone. We'll keep the show running because there's still lots more good content to get through, but hopefully you had a moment to take a quick break. So welcome back. And now that we've had a time to look at some of the financial instruments available to promote gender equality, let's have a look at how an organization can communicate their performance on gender equality, which could be one means of accessing these gender-specific financing mechanisms. However, this is not only important for communicating with investors your impact, but also internal communication is key to ensure that the culture change we've discussed so much today and on Wednesday is a necessary aspect of performance, and it actually takes place. So our final unit of this training has two main sections. We'll talk both about communication and transparency within an organization, among its employees, as well as with external stakeholders. To start with, let's look at how you can manage communication with suppliers. And while there's many methods used to enhance transparency within an organization, what we want to highlight here today is the concept of gender responsive procurement as a tool for advancing gender equality, not just in your own organization, but in a wider marketplace. To guide us on this, our colleague at UN Women, Miwa, will be with us to discuss the tools provided by the WEPS team to support this topic. So I'll turn it over to Miwa now.
Thank you, Landon, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Great to see you, all of you, again. So let me get my slide. Okay. So while it's important for an organization to communicate their performance on gender equality, the Web Secretariat also encourages companies to engage with their suppliers, as Landon mentioned. So when people hear the word supplier engagement, they often associate it with the compliance and requirements. But today I'm going to take a look at communication from a slightly different angle, how to communicate and engage with your suppliers. Supplier engagement on gender equality is critical because a company's impact extend far beyond its immediate operations and into the value chain. By promoting gender equality among suppliers, businesses strengthen suppliers' performance, ensure their compliance with the law, and build more resilient, inclusive value chains. In doing so, they turn shared values into measurable impact, benefiting both business and society. Supplier engagement is about partnerships, support, and mutual benefits. Companies can set the tone by clearly communicating expectations, assessing where suppliers stand, and then providing practical tools, incentives, and support to help them improve. So when we talk about GRP at WEBs, we mean fostering a gender-responsive ecosystem. So when web signatories are purchasing from other web signatories, they enhance their supplier diversity, but also contribute to reducing systematic discrimination. By doing so, companies can multiply their impact on gender equality, enhance their supply diversity, reduce systematic discrimination. And we encourage and guide web signatories to systematically source their goods and services from other enterprises that align with the webs. Pursuing gender-responsive procurement can enhance the supplier's opportunity to grow and gain exposure to business network, high-value market opportunities, and sustainable revenue streams. So then you maybe, I got a little too far ahead. So before you engage and communicate with your supplier, it's important for you to understand where your company stands when it comes to gender responsive procurement. And the Gender Responsive Procurement Assessment Tool, or GRP assessment tool in short, is a tool, it's a self-assessment tool for web signatories to assess the progress on their gender responsive policies and practices. The tool helps companies to advance gender equality in their marketplace by providing opportunity to assess if the company's procurement policies and practices are gender responsive. We have been encouraging our signatories to take it and even further encourage their suppliers to take this to create an impact for the entire ecosystem. The GRP assessment tool comprises of 31 questions covering 5 main themes. The first one is gender equality commitment, procurement policy and strategy, internal procurement and supply chain management department, supplier database and data reporting, and lastly, supplier engagement and diversification. Based on the data you provide, you will receive a scorecard that highlights some gaps and areas for improvement, similar to the gender gap analysis tool from beginner, improver, achiever to leader. The data that you enter into the self-assessment tool will be treated strictly confidential, and the result will never be linked back to any individual company or divulged into public. So just like developing a gender action plan, consultation and communication is key for developing gender responsive procurement strategy. So listen to your internal stakeholders and ask questions to your suppliers. So these are step-by-steps on how to do so. First step is to secure company-wide commitment and support. Communicate internally on your company's GRP maturity level and goals. Use specific numbers, target, and time frame to seek support. Second, ensure diverse teams and build their capacity. Ensure your company's procurement team is on board with gender equality and understand gender responsive procurement. The diversity of the team is also about having both women and men buyers that may understand diverse supplier perspectives. Third, set performance targets and track results. Based on your assessment result, create a GRP action plan with specific performance target and monitor and track records. Fourth, you should map your suppliers. This is where external communication comes in. Map your suppliers and learn more about them. Are they a web signatory? Are they owned by women? Where are they based and what's their market and composition of their workforce like? Lastly, fifth, engage with the current and future suppliers to adopt webs and help build their capacity. After you map your suppliers, engage with them to share your company's stance on gender equality and help them understand the importance of them being part of this movement. So in 2023, we have conducted a global pilot with a group of watch and jewelry companies to test the GRP assessment tool at a global and an industry level. This was an opportunity for us to learn that gender equality leaders in the workplace still had room to improve when it comes to gender equality in the marketplace, and that this is a new area of work for most companies. So we have identified several gaps that gathering sex disaggregated data on their supplier was not a widely practiced activities, and GRP wasn't integrated into the core business strategy. And the lack of KPIs to track progress was also another gap we've identified. So having identified those gaps and challenges, we have developed a set of recommendations that can be useful for those companies who are starting this journey. First one is to develop a standalone gender responsive procurement policies, strategies, and action plans with clear annual indicators and targets. When doing so, again, consult with your internal and external stakeholders, including your suppliers. Second point, related to the first point, is to ensure effective support into the GRP implementation and monitor progress, including through surveys and consultation. As I mentioned in the first part of this training on Wednesday, what gets measured gets done. So it's important. It's the same for gender responsive procurement. Measure and monitor your progress. Third, empower employees through GRP training, enlightening them about its business rationale and guiding them towards tangible and concrete steps in reshaping current practices. Actively seek out women for procurement roles, including influential managerial and executive procurement positions. Fourth, collect sex disaggregated data and report regularly on the progress made. Transparency could serve as a linchpin to propel advancement on gender equality and women's empowerment. Lastly, engage suppliers on gender equality and women's empowerment. Encourage them to sign the webs, encourage them to build their capacity, and when time comes, report on their progress on gender equality and women's empowerment. I hope today's session has inspired you to go back to your companies to take a step toward advancing gender equality through gender responsive procurement. And just imagine what an impact it could have for your company or for your suppliers and for your business community and for the society at large. So you're the one action away. You are one action away from becoming a GRP pioneer. So I'll hand over to Landon, and thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Miwa. And I saw a couple questions coming through looking for more information on the GRP implementation in the tool and any other information. So if you don't mind sharing that in the chat, Miwa, a link or any resource, it seems like
Definitely.
folks are quite keen on it. So that's great to see.
Thank you. I'll do so.
Thank you. Great. So thank you again to Miwa. Really important work being done with the WEPs and with the GRP, and really helpful overview on gender responsive procurement. So now that we've covered engaging suppliers through gender responsive procurement, let's move on to communicating more widely to other external stakeholders. To kick this off, I'm going to quickly launch a little Zoom poll here to see how your organizations are currently disclosing gender-related information. So just give me one moment here, find the poll. Okay, so does your company disclose gender-related information through one or more of these mechanisms? So you can select more than one option, just to be clear. Or it could be all of the above. As you're filling this in, feel free to let us know in the chat. What do you think determines where gender-related information should appear? What factor are you looking for to decide if, for example, information should appear in an annual financial reporting package, perhaps using the ISSB's IFRS Sustainability Disclosure Standards, or instead in a sustainability report, perhaps using the GRI standards? So it'd be great to see if anyone has any thoughts or reflections on that. Okay. Over 220 answers coming through now, so I'm going to give a few more seconds and then we'll end the poll. Okay, slowing down, so I'll end the poll there in the sake of time. Okay, so interestingly, we see the most disclosures from this group coming through CSR, ESG, and sustainability report. We see a lot in second place for the annual financial report. We see a small group, about 10%, saying all of the above. For those who answered, I'm not sure, with about 14%, I encourage you to look into this a bit more. And for those who answered none of the above, I encourage you to advocate in your company for disclosing gender-related information through one of those mechanisms. With that, oh, apologies, fell one slide behind. Now with that, who you communicate to defines where you report and what standard you will use. To report to investors, the primary location for your gender-related disclosures will be in your annual report. The International Sustainability Standards Board has consolidated the major investor-oriented sustainability disclosure standards, and then for reporting to other stakeholders, you might want to use the GRI standards, which are widely used by organizations globally, and they're more multi-stakeholder focused. Together, these can form a holistic reporting package to a wide range of stakeholders. In terms of the content for each type of audience, for investors, you might want to focus your disclosure on financially material risks and opportunities related to gender equality, as well as any other information that can help investors in their investment decisions and engagement with the company. As I said, this would go into your annual report alongside financial statements and other disclosures. And to communicate to a broader stakeholder group, you'd report more about the impact of your business on the environment, society, and economy at large, as this will be more in line with what that group would want to know. And at the same time, the information will also be useful to some of your investors and it will support the information you reported in your annual financial report. To report to your investors in your annual financial report, the IFRS Sustainability Disclosure Standards requires your organization to disclose 4 broad areas, which you might already recognize if you're familiar with the recommendations of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, or TCFD. The ISSB S1 standard requires an entity to disclose information about all sustainability-related risks and opportunities that could reasonably be expected to affect the entity's cash flows, its access to finance, or the cost of capital over the short, medium, or long term. While the ISSB doesn't yet provide specific metrics or disclosure requirements on gender equality, it does highlight that companies should make use of the SASB standards and GRI standards to identify appropriate disclosures for sustainability-related risks and opportunities. On that note, looking at GRI 2 gender-related standards and multi-stakeholder reporting, we here at the SSE, we went through the GRI standards and identified those that most directly address gender equality, hopefully to help you know where to find guidance on gender equality disclosures for your sustainability reports. So gender-related disclosures are part of disclosures in GRI 2 on employees with 2-7, on governance structure and composition, that's 2-9, on 2-23 policy commitments, and 2-29 on approach to stakeholder engagement. And you can see the references to the particular sections on the slide here, and you can find further information on those disclosures if you're keen. As well on GRI, we have GRI 400. GRI has already transitioned to its new modular structure with the revised universal standards introduced in 2021, and guidance from the 2016 standards can still provide valuable context. Although sector and topic standards are in various stages of development and revisions, they continue to offer important insights for materiality assessments and reporting. So if we look at the reporting requirements for both GRI 405, which is on diversity and equal opportunity, GRI 406 on non-discrimination, we see a few additional guidelines on disclosure of gender-related information. And in both of those guidelines, it's recommended that the reporting organization shall report its management approach for diversity and equal opportunity using GRI 103, management approach. I know this is a lot of different standards and disclosures being thrown around, so I really encourage you after the session to look back through the slides another time. And I'll also note GRI 202-1 also requires you to disclose ratios of standard entry-level wage by gender compared to local minimum wage. With that, I want to talk us through an example now. So we've had a chance to look at the standards, so let's look at a real-world example to see what this looks like in practice. And this first example disclosure is on governance. So these examples are just excerpts from actual reports, so they present a piece of a bigger picture. These are examples of current practice, and we are not passing judgment on them as to whether they're good or bad practices. So first, we'll look at this governance disclosure from the annual report of Airtel, who are a Nigerian telecommunications company. And in line with the IFRS Sustainability Disclosure Standards requirements, they reported about the processes they use to monitor, manage, and oversee their sustainability-related performance. Here they noted that non-financial performance KPIs linked to their sustainability strategy includes gender diversity. They also note that these KPIs are linked to the board's remuneration. I always think that's a pretty serious or strong incentive to take this seriously. The next example I want to talk through is an example disclosure for strategy. Strategy disclosures aim to help the readers of your report to understand your strategy for managing sustainability-related risks and opportunities. Here we see the annual report of Astra International. They're an Indonesian conglomerate. Astra outlines the importance of the diversity of its employees to its success. Importantly, this statement is then backed up by a roadmap you see on a snippet on the right-hand side of the screen, and some other actions to manage the opportunity they see through a more gender diverse workforce. In other parts of the report, Astra goes into further details about how the company is implementing this, for example, through programs to make the workplace more suitable for women and through a women development program, which helps prepare women leaders for higher positions in their companies. Interestingly, they say that human capital development in 2022 covers 3 focus areas, which are to build an agile organization, develop passionate and energetic leaders so as to be able to navigate the organization in facing business challenges, as well as carry out the culture of continuous improvement and innovation to maintain their relevancy in the era of disruptions. In other words, Astra International stated that a more diverse and gender equal business can help to maintain the company's relevancy during an era of disruptions. So this is an interesting insight into their strategic approach to gender equality. Now let's turn to an example disclosure on risk management, and we'll take a look at a company I'm sure we all know, Coca-Cola, with their annual report. Or Coca-Cola HBC to be specific. As a reminder, risk management disclosures are intended to help the reader of the report to understand your processes to identify, assess, prioritize, and monitor sustainability-related risks and opportunities. And here, Coca-Cola HBC provides an overview of how they go about identifying material risks, saying that to assess inward impacts, we use our annual materiality survey, but also investor-driven frameworks such as SASB, insights from regular calls with investors, our risk management process, including climate scenario analysis, and input from our markets and business units. You'll see this little matrix here on the left-hand side of the screen, and you can see their outward impacts in this matrix on the horizontal axis or axes. Won't go through all the details there, but you do see human rights, gender equality right there in that blue circle. Next up, we have an example disclosure on metrics and targets. This is brought to us by Cemex. They're a Mexican multinational cement company. Cemex is quite a historically, traditionally male-dominated field. So I think this is an interesting example for that reason. Cemex states in their annual report that it's a signatory to the UN Women WEPs, as well as to the UN Global Compact's target on gender equality. And in this example, we see a good example of target setting. They're updating on the progress they made towards gender equality in their workforce. And this example does show that really any business, even in a traditionally male-dominated field, can take action towards gender equality. So here they set a new goal to increase the representation of women in senior management positions. They specify their base year, they specify their target year, they specify their target percentage, as well as the target year. Later on in the report, they also report on some other metrics, such as percentage of workforce by gender, percentage of female employees by position, and woman to men remuneration ratio by region. So they disaggregate their data a little bit, which is good to see. So on this topic of metrics and disclosures, the SSE, alongside the IFC and with collaboration with UN Women, released a new report not too long ago that provides the first comprehensive comparative assessment of gender-related disclosure metrics issued by stock exchanges and standard setters worldwide. I would really encourage you to take a few minutes to check this report out. It's definitely worth a read. And if my colleague could share the link to that report as well in the chat. So in addition to the standards we just discussed, there's also some additional organizations that you can look to for more guidance on this topic. So there's the guiding principles for you to consider, such as the UN Charter of Human Rights, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, or the UN Women's Empowerment Principles, the WEPs, which we've, of course, discussed over today's session and last session. In addition, it's always important to know what disclosures are required of your organization by law. Beyond this, there's also a number of rankings or benchmarks to consider, such as the World Benchmarking Alliance. There's also a number of indices and rating agencies that take into account the social performance of companies. We've discussed a bit the Bloomberg Gender Equality Index and indices. And then there's also management standards that your organization may wish to adopt, which can help enhance your company's or your organization's performance on gender. You can have a look, for example, at the ISO 26000 guidance on social responsibility, and gender equality is also present in many other ISO standards. I'll also mention the SDG impact standards. Those are management practice standards designed to help guide businesses and investors to embed sustainability into their decision-making approach. So with that, I know this was a big section, but hopefully it provides an overview of some of the disclosure guidelines you can consider. But previously, we also talked about standards and certifications that can be used to develop your organization's gender equality practices and disclosures. And with that, we're very happy to have with us today the Managing Director of EDGE, David Pritchett, from the EDGE Certified Foundation, to tell us more about this, as mentioned last time, if you want to take that additional step further in certifying your gender equality practices, EDGE is a great way to go about it. So with that, I'll turn it over to David.
Thanks, Landon. Thanks a lot. Thanks also, Fiona. Thanks to the UN SSE team for this really insightful presentation and overview of the different standards and frameworks that exist. To set this off, amazing work that you've done on the alignment and the benchmarking of the different standards. I think it's quite overwhelming now, the number of standards and frameworks which are out there, which cover gender equality metrics to some extent. I think it's important, and I would encourage all those organizations getting started here or looking at which frameworks to align to really take time to explore the different metrics, because each and every framework has a slightly different objective and purpose to it. Some of them are very compliance driven in certain markets. Some of them are covering a baseline of metrics across a lot of different areas and look at societal impact, and others are very laser focused and driven to a specific objective and purpose. And that's where EDGE comes in. I think EDGE certification and the EDGE standards, they align and they are overlapping with a lot of what you've heard. They align with the UN Women's Economic Empowerment Principles, especially in Principles 1, 2, 4, and 7. For those of you who are more familiar with those ones touch more on the impact in the workplace. They align with the Bloomberg indicators. They align with a lot of the GRI, the ISSB standards. They align with the EU regulations on pay transparency and on corporate sustainability reporting, for example. But where EDGE goes slightly deeper, it's very laser focused on equitable career development opportunities and equitable management of a career for women in the workplace. So that's where I'm going to come from for the presentation. What I'll do in about 5 minutes or so is give you an overview, and then if anyone has any questions, and we'll take those, I guess, with Landon and the team at the end. is an independent third-party system, so it's very impartial. I sit in the EDGE Certified Foundation, which is the driver of a certain methodology to assess gender equality in the workplace and to assess equitable career development opportunities for men and for women in the workplace. We've developed a certification methodology which is used by EDGE Strategy, but also licensed partners such as the IFC. You would have probably heard from the IFC over the last 2 days. They're very present here in all of the different frameworks which look at gender equality metrics. The IFC are using the EDGE standards to assess their portfolio of organizations, especially in emerging markets, to understand some of the underlying factors which drive a specific gender dynamic within the organization in terms of representation, in terms of policies and practices, etc. So on the basis of this holistic assessment using the EDGE standards, they're able to implement their very strong capacity building skills to enhance and create improved economic impact. So EDGE Strategy and IFC work with clients directly, and the EDGE Certified Foundation works with certification bodies or auditors, because the information which is assessed as part of the EDGE scheme is audited by a third party, which enables a credible certification methodology. What are we measuring? I think just let me break this down and demystify a little bit what's behind it. We're looking at 4 different pillars. We're looking at representation. When I say representation, it's the gender balance across different levels of hierarchy within an organization, across different job types. We're looking at representation across a number of the core drivers of gender equality in the workplace. So we're looking at representation in recruitment, in promotion, in leadership development, in top talent, in mentoring, in sponsorship, in parental leave. We're looking at representation really in many different elements and looking at the data to be able to see what the trends are in that data. At the same time, we're looking at the pay data using an unexplained gender pay gap analysis, a regression model, or an adjusted pay gap analysis. So a very strong statistical model to look at the pay equity, which aligns to the EU Pay Transparency Directive. Third pillar is to look at the effectiveness of policies and practices. And here we're looking again at the core value drivers, the same areas that we cover in representation, but looking at the recruitment, promotion, equal pay, flexible working, organizational culture, etc. What are the effectiveness of the policies and practices of an organization in driving an effective and equitable career development opportunity for organizations? And finally, something which is quite unique to the EDGE certification system is we look at the inclusiveness of the culture. So we survey each and every employee of an organization to understand their perceptions and their experiences with regard to gender equality in the workplace and how they feel about the implementation, the effective implementation of the practices, and how they feel about the communication of the leadership, how they feel about the fairness of the workplace in which they are working. So all these 3 sources of information are triangulated. It's a framework which is harmonized with the data, policies, practices, and the survey experiences. And by doing that, we can really understand for each and every organization where are the underlying factors which create a specific dynamic, because each and every organization will have a slightly different dynamic depending on their jurisdiction, the sector that they work in, the geography that they work in, the size of the organization, etc. There will be drivers which they can identify from such a holistic analysis. I'll come to a couple of examples in a second. It's a performance-based level of certification scheme. So we have currently 3 levels of certification: assess, move, and lead, which are given to recognize different levels of performance against the EDGE standards. We are introducing from the 1st of January a 4th standard, EDGE Advance, which fits in between the EDGE Move and EDGE Lead, which is really designed to go even more granular in recognizing the different performance levels of organizations. We do also look at EDGE Plus. EDGE Plus is looking at gender and intersectional equity. So we are also enabling an organization. I know this might not be the topic of this webinar, but we enable organizations to really look at the performance of their organization for gender in intersection with other dimensions of diversity, such as age, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, socioeconomic background, etc. A couple of examples maybe to illustrate the value that organizations get, and Landon introduced the CEMEX example using the UN WEPs, and CEMEX is also an Edge client as well. So interesting that they use the UN WEPs as a strong foundation and baseline for the commitment to gender equality for their organization, but they also use the Edge standards to push some of the core metrics, which you would have seen on that slide. It is a very similar organization to CEMEX. It's actually in the energy industry. A large organization has now gone through 3 levels of certification. When they came to Edge in 2020, they saw, it's slightly small here, but you'll see different levels of management and the representation at different levels of management, all being below 30% of women. So they struggled with regard to effectively recruiting and retaining women in their workforce as the different levels of hierarchy. So what they worked with us on an action plan once they'd identified these gaps to really collect, measure, and analyze the data across their workforce, but also with different job types, with people in people management responsibilities, some as individual contributors. They looked at those with support functions, those with support functions, with core functions, those with profits and loss related responsibilities. They really identified where in their organization they had a representation gap. They looked at this across, as I mentioned, 11 different data tables, and understood where they could make a difference. And what they aimed to do was obviously to improve the level of representation in their organization, but that's not simply by recruiting in women at different levels of management. It was rather through creating an organizational culture which enhanced the equal opportunity in promotion, in leadership development practices, in mentoring and sponsorship programs, and in pay equity. And those kinds of looking at that data and then implementing respective and corresponding policies and practices, the organization was able to recruit, but also retain and promote an equitable number of women in the organization, to see their representation numbers go up in 4 years, which is quite a short period of time, because it's usually quite difficult to move these numbers on a year-to-year basis. A second example, this one in the finance industry. I'm not sure which industries are mostly represented here, but I took sort of energy and finance, as I know that they're quite common industries which we work with. Finance industry, this organization, which was a European-based organization, came to us in 2022, and they had quite immature policies and practices in gender equality. They felt that they were doing a good job, that the management were committed to gender equality, but they did not really anchor the gender equality topic within their policies and practices. They hadn't screened all of their policies, practices in, let's say, recruitment and promotion, in leadership development training, to make sure that they were really looking at the equitable areas. And they focused on those quite heavily over a 2-year period, and saw their scores go up. So they looked at, some of the typical recruitment processes about reaching out to types of sources of candidates they hadn't looked at before. They looked at eliminating the identification aspects in recruitment processes and things like that. They looked at the promotion procedures that they had and how they were applied, also the talent management processes and the employment satisfaction, etc. And all these things, if you can objectify and make these things fairer within an organization's, this kind of finance organization was able to see that they were able to improve the maturity of their policies practices, which has the knock-on effect of obviously improving the experience and the perceptions. So that's very short about Edge, just who we are, where we come from. We have 900 organizations have been through this, parts of the world, 72 countries, different sizes of organizations. This is just a subset of those organizations, different sizes, different types of organizations. A lot of the UN agencies have been through this, IFC, World Bank, IMF, etc. We've also seen a lot of larger multinationals go through this in their headquarters companies, but also some of their subsidiary companies. But we've also seen a lot of emerging market organizations go through this because it's really relevant. It's a cross-cutting theme, as many of you know, and something that I know that you're all very dedicated to. That's why you're interested in this workshop. But I'll stop there and allow any questions from this or any part of the webinar.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that really comprehensive overview, David. We do indeed have, as you see, we've got a big audience today, so we're getting lots of questions, which is fantastic. So firstly, just to say several organizations have shared their experiences of working with Edge and that they're using it with their clients and very much recommend it. So fantastic to hear. We've got a number of organizations using Edge joining us today. In terms of some of the questions we've had, I'll start with the ones we've got in the Q&A. So someone's actually asking around how to become a certification body for certifying Edge, and if there's any opportunities for consulting organizations to get involved in that.
Yeah, so certification bodies plays a key role in this program, obviously, because they're the ones that are able to deliver the certification. They're the ones that check the accuracy and completeness of the data and information that an organization actually has in their data tables. And to be a certification body, we have specific requirements. We have 3 for the reason that it suits our ecosystem to have 3. It's a number which is not too many, so it doesn't stretch the resources too far, that the certification bodies, each one is able to do a certain number of audits each year to maintain their competence and experience. And they're also global certification bodies, so they're able to operate in the 72 different markets in which Edge has clients. So hence the 3 there, you will know them, most of you will know of them. I think for those that are interested to audit, these certification bodies, they do take freelancers. So if you have social auditing experience and you're working in a market which one of the 3 certification bodies might not have strong presence, you can reach out to them. The main contact is on our website. You can reach out to them and offer your services as a social auditor, for example, with experience in social auditing, and they may be interested to add you to their roster as a freelancer. That's also possible.
Great, thanks for clarifying that, David. That makes sense. So yeah, encourage anyone interested to follow up and look at those certification bodies. Okay, so another question is around hearing about if you've got anything you can share on the experiences on the applicability of the standards in both the public and private sector, and maybe how the implementation experiences could differ between those types of organization.
Yeah, equally, it is a very generic standard. We've made it generic for public and private sector organizations. As you saw, the UN agencies go through this. OECD have gone through this themselves. There's the European Central Bank, the European Investment Bank, European Investment Fund. They use this. I think they have maybe slightly different drivers. I see that a lot of the public sector facing organizations, they themselves have gender strategies, and they are orchestrating gender strategies within their remit. So UN agencies, they set gender strategies for countries, or the World Bank are setting gender strategies for organizations that they work with as a driver of long-term economic success. So what they're trying to do with the Edge certification is to get their own house in order to make sure that they are walking the talk with regard to their own workforce, because Edge is really about embedding gender equality in the workforce. We're not looking at the sort of outside of the perimeters of an organization. So for the public sector, that's often the driver. For the private sector, it's often about the attraction and retention of women employees and ensuring that they're able to effectively move up the career ladder in a fair way, because they often see the drain and the loss of women at a certain level of management, and they usually want to try to rectify that. So this is the kind of solution that they look for.
Brilliant. Thanks for sharing that. Just a couple more as well. I think I know the answer to this one, but maybe it's worth restating. Someone, Rania, is asking if there's a requirement to indicating the minimum number of employees that a company should have to pursue the Edge certification.
Yes, really good question. Given the nature and the holistic sort of nature of the assessment, it does make sense for an organization to have 100 or more employees to be EDGE certified, because it's an anonymized and aggregated assessment. So this is also often a common question. It's run on an anonymized, aggregated way, so that the perceptions of employees are not known to the employer, if you like, because they are only shown, they're aggregated and they're anonymized, so they're only shown when there's more than one uniquely identifiable person at one level of management or one job type. So 100 or more is the answer to that question. Some companies have done it with less than 100. They're usually the subsidiaries of a global multinational who want to go through this. So if you have a multinational with a higher number of employees, but you have a subsidiary with a smaller number and you want to roll this out more on a regional, on a global basis, we allow that to happen as well.
Great, fantastic. Thanks for explaining that so clearly, and good to understand the reasons for that as well for those organizations thinking about this. Okay, just a couple more. Someone's asking about if you are certified, is it something that you need to renew with any sort of certain periodicity?
Yes, correct. Yeah, good question. The certification, a bit like sort of the ISO, most of the certificates, or management system certificates, they are renewable. At the moment, we're looking at a 2-year recertification period. So to rerun the assessment, and that enables, I think through the examples you would have seen that I showed, there was a 3-year cycle and a 2-year cycle for those two. It's important to go through that to show and to benchmark your performance against a previous assessment to see where you've moved the needle on some of those indicators. So yeah, it's a cyclical assessment which is run at the moment every 2 years.
Fantastic, thank you. And then I think all that leaves us with, there's a couple of people are keen to know what the next step would be and how to get in touch if they'd like to know more. I think if you wouldn't mind, Landon, sharing the link again to the EDGE website and David's presentation materials, but I think they're probably the two best routes to have a look at in the first instance.
Absolutely. I think you'll have the slide deck on your website, on your landing page, Fiona, which is perfect for everyone. And you can reach out to us through our website or connect to me over LinkedIn. It's fine if you have any difficulties connecting with the team.
Super, thank you for that. Yeah, and I just seen Landon's shared that as well. So brilliant.
Perfect.
Well, thank you so much
Thanks,
for that, David. As you say, great to see lots of interest and engagement from the audience today. So I'm sure you'll hear from a few people in follow-up to this, but big thanks for joining us again.
No, you're welcome. Thank you so much.
No problem. Great. So I'll just take us back now into the slide presentation. We'll just be covering off a few final points as we wrap up our session today. So our final point actually is just to revisit Menti quickly, to do a quick recap on those knowledge areas that we started out with at the beginning of the session. So I think we'll reshare the link to Menti if that's okay, please, Landon, and I'll just share my screen quickly so we can have a look at this together too. And our question just to come back to is those kind of 3 key areas that we started out with at the beginning of the session around the value of gender equality for investment strategies, on communicating to investors, and on speaking to your colleagues about the financial value of gender. So it's great to know where you think your understanding on these areas is up to now. And I know we were somewhere right in the middle of the scale, around 5 at the beginning of the session, and it looks like we've certainly shifted up that scale into sort of a higher degree of comfort on all of those now. So that's fantastic. Thanks everyone for sharing with us your opinions there. And then we'll just leave you with a final kind of reflection question. We know, obviously, in a training session, 4 hours is to some extent a very short amount of time and also quite a lot. So we've covered lots of different concepts with you in the last 2 sessions, but great to have a think about what's really front of mind for you that you want to take away and maybe understand better, or maybe take forward as an action within your organization as a result of these sessions. So it'd be great if you could just share with us in a couple of words your key reflection there. And hopefully leaves a little note in your mind to look into this topic. So I'm seeing gender bonds coming up there. So some people have found gender bonds in particular really interesting today, which is fantastic to hear. I'm also seeing the understanding, I guess, on the need for gender lens investing, and maybe now knowing that gender equality is perhaps something more of a nuanced topic than maybe where some of us started our training at, which is great. Seeing some people mentioning the need for measurement, of course, to understand the topic better. So fantastic. Thanks everyone for sharing those reflections. Okay, I'll leave you to keep responding on that. So do keep sharing your takeaways. They're always good to see. And then from my side, just a few slides to wrap us up now and cover some resources to support you and the all-important information about your completion certificates as well. So as I've mentioned, there's lots of different resources that we've talked about today, and hopefully this session has just been a good overview to give you familiarity with a lot of those. But of course, this is the beginning of the learning journey, or one stage in it. So encourage you to take a look at the slide presentation, which we shared the link to. That's available to download from the event page for today. And what you'll find there is our slide presentation, which includes also the UN Women content delivered by Miwa. You'll also find the handouts for all of our guest speakers, which include the information about how to follow up with those organisations, and a separate handout as well that provides some academic studies that you might find interesting to better understand some of the cases we've talked about here in terms of the importance of gender for financial performance, etc. And then the recording of today's training session will also be made available on that page as well, so you can watch that back and recap on any things that you might want to cover again. And I'll just show you here in the slide handout, we have these links available for each unit of the training that just covers some of the key links and resources that we've shared with you each time as well. So make sure to check that out in the handout if you'd like to find any of the materials that we've been sharing with you in the chat. And so that really brings us to the point that we want to thank you for, really, which is to thank you very much for taking the time to join us in this training. We recognise it's a big investment in your week, and we really appreciate the engagement, enthusiasm, and all the fantastic insights and questions that everyone has shared with us in the sessions. So as a token of appreciation for that, you're now able to receive your completion certificate. And we'd also love to hear your feedback as well on this training programme. So that's another part of this process. So to get your certificate, what you'll need to do is take part in the feedback survey, and Landon has just shared the link with you in the chat so that you can access this. If you complete that survey, you will then send you your completion certificate within around a week of taking part in the survey. And if for any reason you miss that link that Landon has just shared, it will also be sent out in an email to participants from Zoom in 24 hours as well. So make sure to look out for it there and complete the survey via that link. I should say, sometimes we know the certificates can get blocked by organisation spam filters, so make sure to double check your junk folder if you're missing your certificate after about a week. And otherwise, you can contact the SSE team if you have any issues, but give us around a week and you should get your certificate through. And really what that brings us to is just a summary, as I said, of some of the organisations involved in the training and how you can follow up with them, the SSE team, UN Women and IFC. And as I said, the guest speakers, please refer to their materials on the webpage for their contact details. But just to say a final thank you to our guest speakers today, to Guillaume from the Luxembourg Stock Exchange and to David from the EDGE Certified Foundation for sharing their perspectives with us today. And lastly, a big thank you to the SSE's official supporters and the organisations, particularly who we've partnered with on today's training programme. So IFC, UN Women, and particularly Miwa, who joined us today, Columbia University, and the support of the government of Luxembourg as well. So all that remains from my side is to thank you all again for your participation and engagement in the session. We really hope this has been a helpful part of your learning and understanding on this topic, and we look forward to seeing you again at a future training session. So enjoying the rest of your days, and hope you have a great weekend as well. Thanks, everyone.